A bunch of new celebrity documentaries have just dropped on streamers. We've got Jim Henson, Idea Man, Let the Canary Sing with Cyndi Lauper, The Beach Boys, and Frida. Hey guys, Dan here. This is Dan Reviews It. Welcome to my documentary reviews for 4 recent celebrity documentaries. They just keep coming out. There's actually a new one about Celine Dion that just dropped. So they're always coming out on streamers with new celebrity docs. And in fact, the Bratz documentary with Andrew McCarthy, I did a separate video for that just because that was such a sort of cultural talking point a few weeks ago. So you can check out that video. But here we're going to talk about these 4 documentaries that have recently hit streamers. Before we launch into them, though, let me welcome you into Dan Reviews It. Thank you for finding this video. We do movie and TV reviews on the channel, and just about every day I post something new, so there's always a lot going on here. Please consider subscribing, click that like button, comment below. All that stuff, of course, helps the channel out. And check out my other documentary videos. Like I mentioned, I did the Bratz video. There was also a Movie Pass documentary that just came out about the rise and fall of that service. So I did a review of that. But here, I figured we would just kind of do kind of smaller reviews for these 4. These aren't, major releases, although the Jim Henson one was #1 on Disney Plus for a few weeks after it came out. So I think we'll start with that one. And there's some big star power behind this, not just as the subject being Jim Henson, but Ron Howard directed this. So obviously, this is one of the major filmmakers of our time. And I'm not exactly sure what the connection is between the two. I don't know if Ron Howard ever worked with any of the Muppet things. I mean, the Muppet Show was on when Happy Days was on, so maybe there was, some crossover there. Maybe he guested on the Muppet Show or something. I don't know. That specifically is not discussed here, but, perhaps he was just fascinated by the man. So, this one is streaming on Disney Plus, and it is called Jim Henson, Idea Man. It covers basically, the early years of his career in the early days of television and his, life as a very young puppeteer to creating, some of the most famous works of puppetry in history, Sesame Street, The Muppet Show, some of the movies he worked on, Labyrinth and The Dark Crystal, and it also features stuff about his wife and business partner, Jane Henson. So, of course, Jim Henson passed decades ago at this point. That's no secret. And this documentary is a really nice overview look of his life. Now, I read his biography a few years ago, so I wouldn't say for me personally there was a ton of new information here for me, but if, someone has not read that or hasn't really delved much into the Henson universe, I think this will be pretty cool to see. And, what's nice is, of course, reading the book, I could read about all of the old, 60s TV that he had done, sort of the live commercials he did and all of that sort of stuff. But to actually see the video to go along with it, as we do here in the documentary, that was pretty cool, because, of course, I had visions of maybe what that looked like or whatever, when I read the book. But it was definitely cool to see some of those old spots. And then, moving into The Muppet Show and Sesame Street. Now, there was a documentary, maybe 2 documentaries about Sesame Street a few years ago. Street Gang, I believe, was one of them. So, they do spend a lot of time, maybe not a lot of time, but definitely, a decent amount of time for the documentary on the creation of Sesame Street and his, jobs there and his helping to form the ideas and stuff. I think a lot of that stuff was already covered in the Street Gang documentary as well. But, it's nice to get his personal, hands-on, what exactly did Jim do as part of the creation and lifetime of Sesame Street. And they interview his kids here who are still with us. And Brian Henson, I believe, is now the president of like the Muppets Corporation or whatever. And it makes sense, by the way, this would be on Disney Plus because Disney bought the Muppets years and years ago. So all the newer Muppet stuff is available on Disney Plus as well. So look, overall, I think this is a well-done documentary. If you did read the biography, I don't think there is a lot new here. But look, that makes sense. I mean, the man's life was the man's life. So, and he was pretty, open about, his maybe struggles in the marriage because of the focus on work and everything. And they interviewed, a lot of the people involved with him, not just his kids, but, Frank Oz they talked to. And of course, I think him and Ron Howard, go way back as well. And some of the other people, involved, they talked to Jennifer Connelly, who was part of Labyrinth. So that was kind of cool to hear about sort of that stuff and the departure from the kid-friendly Muppet stuff. And they do talk about the Saturday Night Live days here, so it's definitely a comprehensive overview. Is it a pretty standard documentary? Yes, certainly it is. But I will say I really liked seeing those visual elements that in the book I just read about and now was able to see live. So I leave Jim Henson, Idea Man, with a B+. All right, next we will move to Let the Canary Sing. This is a Cyndi Lauper documentary, and of course she is having a bit of a moment here. She has just reached a milestone birthday. Is it 70 maybe? And she announced her final farewell tour. I was lucky to see her open for Cher years and years ago, and it was a great show. I've been a Cyndi Lauper fan ever since I was into popular music. My first batch of Columbia records, when you did that 10 records for a penny or whatever it was, Cyndi Lauper's True Colors album was part of my initial batch of those. So, I've always been a Cyndi Lauper fan. And the director here is Allison Elwood, whose name I was unfamiliar with, but she did the Go-Go's documentary a few years ago for Showtime, and that was a really phenomenal look at that 80s girl group staple. And so here, now we've got another 80s stalwart in Cyndi Lauper, and this goes back way before her solo days. Told me some things I had no idea. She was in this band that was picking up some steam, and eventually she became kind of the breakout star of that, and they offered her and her alone a record contract, and so she had to kind of leave the rest of the band behind. But it took a look at her songwriting abilities, also her vocals, because she's had actually some vocal issues through the years, but she's got one of the most powerhouse voices of that era for sure. There's a clip in the movie with her and Patti LaBelle kind of doing a sing-off to, I think it was Time After Time, and Patti LaBelle, obviously, amazing voice as well, but the two of them just going back and forth, having a diva off. Cyndi Lauper, I think, gets overlooked for her voice because of, sort of her crazy outfits, and Girls Just Want to Have Fun is, sort of a poppy little ditty, right? But in later years, in the last, 10 or 20 years, that has become sort of a female anthem of empowerment. Girls just want to have fundamental rights, was kind of a popular slogan back in the Roe versus Wade debate a couple of years ago. True Colors has become a gay anthem. They talk about that a bit, and they interview her sister here as well, who is a lesbian, which, I didn't really know anything about her family life, so that was kind of cool. And they interview her longtime manager / old boyfriend. There's a lot of really great stuff here, and Allison Elwood, much like with the Go-Go's documentary, really unearthed some interesting footage that I think a lot of people have never seen, even if you're a fan. But it goes through sort of the demise of her pop career as well in the early 90s, as she sort of moved towards more kind of jazzy stuff or blues stuff. And obviously the landscape of pop music was changing as well. But so it goes through all of that. And for me, this is the best documentary of the four. And not just because, I'm a big Cyndi Lauper fan, which I am. But I'm also a big Jim Henson fan too. But this documentary really is sort of a warts and all look at Cyndi Lauper. Not that there's a ton of warts there, because she is, kind of such a positive force, but she certainly has had some downs in her life and her career. And she talks pretty candidly about those, and, her moving a little bit into acting, and that kind of stuff. So, for me, this is, like I said, the best of the four. I'm going to leave Let the Canary Sing with an A-. All right, sticking with the music, let's talk about the Beach Boys. This is on Disney Plus as well, and this was directed by Frank Marshall, who, as far as I know, no relation to Gary Marshall or Penny Marshall, also obviously, big directors, but he is married to Kathleen Kennedy, who is the head of Lucasfilms, so there's sort of the Disney connection again there, and this is featuring a few interviews from band members and adjacent people, but a lot of the band has passed away at this point. Brian Wilson was recently diagnosed with dementia, so he's not a part of this other than, archival footage. But Al Jardine, Mike Love, and there's archive footage as well of some of the other Wilson siblings, Carl and Dennis. And so this examines the start of the band back in the early 60s up through really the mid 70s, and then it just kind of stops, which is very odd because obviously they had a huge hit in the late 80s with Kokomo. In fact, at the time, I think they held the record for longest span between number one hits. It was like 23 years or something since their last number one, and then Kokomo hit number one. That's, to me, that's kind of interesting, and they do play Kokomo over the end credits, but with absolutely no context. And the band is still touring today as sort of Mike Love's version of the Beach Boys. This, to me, is not that great of a documentary. I expected something a little bit more akin to what they did with the Beatles in the 90s when they had the Beatles anthology miniseries on ABC. Now, that was, if I remember correctly, 3 nights of 2 hours each. I mean, that was a huge sort of compendium of the Beatles' career, and of course at that time 3 of the Beatles were still alive, so we heard from them directly. Here this seems a little bit not only disjointed but kind of one-sided. It's been kind of famously written about over and over again, if you know anything really about the Beach Boys lore, that Mike Love over the years has sort of taken credit for maybe things that he didn't do, because he is one of the last standing members. He's able to kind of say, oh, well, no, it was really this way. And so because we are not really able to hear from Brian Wilson, we do hear from his longtime wife, but not from him directly. I don't know. It seemed a little bit skewed to me in that department. And it also just seemed a little bit kind of fluffy. Like I expected something a little bit more deeper. I mean, as a sort of very brief overview of the Beach Boys' star careers in the early days, sure, it works in that regard, but I just sort of felt like, first of all, they're stopping in the mid 70s when they're still actively kind of touring today, as with some iteration of the band. That's 40 years later. They don't cover the 80s stuff at all, which I think is a little bit odd. And again, it's all a little bit one-sided towards, Mike Love's version of the Beach Boys, back in the day. And he is, I think, the cousin of the Wilsons. So he is, part of the family, but still, I just don't understand that. And there was a lot in this about the sort of rivalry between the Beach Boys and the Beatles. Every time the Beach Boys, put out a interesting record, like Pet Sounds begat Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. That's interesting, I guess. And there's, some archival interview footage with Paul McCartney, kind of talking about that. And that's all interesting. But again, let's shift our focus back to the Beach Boys if we're only going to have like an hour and 40 minutes or whatever this is. So I don't know. This one was a little bit of a miss for me. I guess it's worth watching if you are really new to the Beach Boys, don't really know much about their history. But again, it's a little bit skewed. This might be a companion piece to watch with the scripted movie Love and Mercy, with Paul Dano playing a young Brian Wilson and John Cusack playing an older Brian Wilson. That movie, fantastic. That's an A for me. This one, not so much. I'm going to leave the Beach Boys with a C, and that is on Disney Plus. Even the name, it's just all these other ones. Let the Canary Sing, Jim Henson, Idea Man, the Beach Boys. How uninspired. All right, and finally, well, this isn't really an inspired name either. Frida is our final movie, and there was actually a movie called Frida about Frida Kahlo as well, a scripted movie from years and years ago. I think it was Salma Hayek that played her, but this one is the documentary version of the life of Mexican painter Frida Kahlo, and this is Carla Gutierrez's directorial debut. And listen, I think this is for a directorial debut. It's quite the hefty task because, of course, Frida has not been with us for a long time. However, she did record a lot of her life, so we do have some narration really from Frida herself and some of the other people involved in her life at that time. I looked it up, and I do believe it is Frida herself on the recordings. The other people, I'm not sure if that, those are just people reading, lines that other people said or diary entries or whatever. But I believe the audio recordings here are actually authentically from Frida. And also, as first-time director, she did something interesting here with, look, there's only so much archival footage that we have of someone who lived that long ago, about 100 years at this point. And so, yes, some things were filmed, certainly, but a lot of things, were not. And so to kind of cover up those, there are elements of this movie where we sort of bring Frida's paintings to life and sort of give them color and movement in some cases, some animations. And so that was pretty interesting as well. My biggest problem with this is it's quite repetitive. We get a good overview of Frida's life, and I didn't watch the Salma Hayek movie. This actually makes me want to watch it, to see kind of how her portrayal is. I'm sure it's great. Salma Hayek, great actress, but I am not sure. It's a half hour longer, so obviously it covers more ground than this does, and it probably fictionalizes a few things. But this is, pretty straightforward. Okay, this was, Frida's life as a young painter, and then moving into, her marriage and all of these other things. But like I said, it gets a little bit repetitive for me. I certainly learned a lot from it, but it was sort of like a museum exhibit in some ways. Like, how you go into a museum, at least I do, and the first hour is pretty interesting, and then it's like, okay, now, I feel like we've seen some of these similar things, and I feel like we're sort of, treading on ground that we learned back there. And yes, that's a nice painting, but didn't we already see 100 paintings? So yes, maybe I have a short attention span. Maybe I'm dumb. I don't know. But, a good museum run for me is about an hour and a half. And so this felt like a movie that might be playing in a museum, an art museum, where you could just kind of sit and watch it in any part, and okay, cool, that's that, sit down for 10 minutes and watch it, and then get up and see the next exhibit. So in that respect, it sort of lost my interest a little bit, but I think because I knew the least about this subject matter, I definitely learned the most from this movie of the four that I'm talking about today. So I believe Frida with a B. All right, so there you go. Some ones to check out, all streaming right now. Jim Henson and the Beach Boys on Disney+. The Frida I didn't mention, but this is streaming on Amazon Prime. And I'm not sure if I mentioned the Cyndi Lauper one either, is streaming on Paramount+. So you can check all four of these out right now. Thank you for watching Dan Reviews It. And I'm going to put a link up to the Bratz video as well. That's been getting some views. That is a recent documentary that Andrew McCarthy did. You can check that out on Hulu. But watch my review of that as well. And I'll see you next time on Dan Reviews It. Thanks for watching.